In his book, Twilight of the Idols, Friedrich Nietzsche delivers a critique of Socrates, whom he sees as the beginning of the rationalist turn in Western philosophy that ultimately undermines life-affirming values. Nietzsche's Problem of Socrates transcends a simple or historical or even an intellectual critique of the philosopher. It functions as a broader attack on the philosophical tradition that he argues prioritizes abstract reason over the lived complexities of human existence. For Nietzsche, Socrates is not merely a philosopher of reason, but he's a figure who represents a deep existential pathology, one that suppresses the vital life forces of life and fosters a culture of nihilism. Nietzsche's critique of Socrates begins with his suspicion of the philosopher's commitment to reason as a guiding principle of life. Socrates, in Nietzsche's eyes, represents the moment in Western thought when life itself became subordinated to rational abstraction. Likewise, in Athenian society, Socrates' philosophy marks a departure from the Dionysian acceptance of life's chaos and Apollonian making sense of illusion, which Nietzsche celebrates, towards a more sterile pursuit of rational certainty. This video seeks to break down the problem of Socrates specific to Twilight of the Idols. It should be noted that Nietzsche critiques Socrates in a multitude of his works. However, this video is specifically focused on the problem of Socrates in Twilight of the Idols. Nietzsche begins his attack on Socrates with a reevaluation of truth. Whether it was Socrates and Plato in ancient Athens, or in some ironic sense even Nietzsche in 19th century Europe, wise men who question life are always symptoms of the end of that society. Nietzsche's reevaluation of European society and morality in his time was only possible because of the decadence and degeneration in that society. In other words, skepticism is a sign of the end. This is because nobody will ever ask why to something when that something seems to work okay. Nietzsche tells us to scrutinize men like Socrates. Were they shaky, late, decadent? Either ways, they are a sign of the end. To quote Nietzsche, I have recognized Socrates and Plato to be symptoms of degeneration, tools of the Greek dissolution, pseudo-Greek, anti-Greek. Socrates, therefore, according to Nietzsche, is a sign of decadence and decline. His skepticism towards Greek society is, in my opinion, best seen in the Euthyphro, for example, where Socrates questions the virtue of the gods. But why, according to Nietzsche, was Socrates so skeptical and seemingly antagonistic towards Athenian life? Well, in origin, Socrates was ugly and plebeian. This might be Nietzsche's most famous critique of Socrates, and it is indeed the funniest for sure, but there's some value in reevaluating Socrates' ugliness. Quote, in origin, Socrates belonged to the lowest class. Socrates was pleb. We know we can still see for ourselves how ugly he was, but ugliness in itself, an objection, is almost among the Greeks a refutation. Was Socrates Greek at all? The anthropologists among the criminologists tell us that the criminal is ugly, but the criminal is a decadent. Was Socrates a typical criminal? Because of his ugly and unhealthy biology, as well as plebeian status in Athenian life, it makes sense that Socrates would develop an anti-Greek skepticism. We should therefore look cautiously at Socrates, as his virtues might be concealed resentment born from a caricature of those plebeian instincts. With Socrates came a new age of dialectics and rational skepticism in Greek taste. Before Socrates, the Greeks valued piety above all, and later sophism. Since the time of their earliest ancestors, the Greeks derived value and meaning from their devotion and adherence to the gods. One was virtuous and therefore right if they exhibited the qualities of the divine. Whether that be the martial prowess of Zeus, the youthful brilliance of Apollo, or the beauty of Aphrodite, Greek life was fundamentally ordered around the gods. The gods in some ways were also seen as distant ancestors, and for that reason one's birth, familial status, as well as acceptance by the gods, was a place where one could derive virtue. Later on, intellectual traditions like sophism arrived. The sophists were at one time the leading intellectual class in Athenian society. They were primarily teachers of persuasion, rhetoric, and the relativism of knowledge. While the sophists were certainly skeptics themselves, they understood the importance of a life-affirming worldview. They saw truth as something malleable and dependent on man. Socrates was antagonistic against both the traditionalist and the sophists in Athens. From here he introduces dialectics into Greek life, which before him were repudiated in noble life as bad manners, and the Athenian youth were warned of such dialecticians. This is because dialectics were of course plebeian, and a tool for unhonest men. To paraphrase Nietzsche, with Socrates, the Greek taste changes in favor of dialectics. What really happened there? Above all, a noble taste is thus vanquished. With dialectics, the plebs come on top. Before Socrates, dialectic manners were repudiated in good society. They were considered bad manners. They were considered compromising. The young were warned against them. Furthermore, all such presentations of one's reasons were distrusted. Honest things like honest men do not carry their reasons in their hands like that. It is indecent to show them. The dialectician is a kind of buffoon. One laughs at him. One does not take him seriously. One chooses dialectic only when one has no other means. The irony of Socrates is an expression of revolt, of plebeian resentment. Does he avenge himself on the noble people whom he fascinates? As a dialectician, one holds a merciless tool in one's hand. One can become a tyrant by means of it. One compromises those who conquers. The dialectician leaves it to the opponent to prove that he is no idiot. He makes one furious and helpless at the same time. The dialectician renders the intellect of his opponent powerless. Indeed, is a dialectic only a form of revenge in Socrates? The taste of dialectics in Athenian life is therefore a tool of the plebeian class in order to get revenge against the nobler tastes in Greek society, whether that be piety or sophism. All this begs the question, if Socrates was so anti-Greek, how did he become such a quintessential part of Athenian society? Nietzsche believes Socrates appealed to the agonistic impulses of Greek culture, and especially that found in the Greek youth. Likewise, Socrates was not so much a malicious schemer set upon bringing the end of Greek civilization, as much as he was a symptom of the end. The same kind of degeneration Socrates symbolized was already manifesting in Athenian society. Old Athens was quietly coming to an end, and Socrates furthermore sensed that the world needed him. The rationalism, skepticism, and obsession with cerebral virtue was a personal sign of self-preservation. The impulses that had grown Greek appetite up to that point had begun to dwindle. This is fascinating because what Nietzsche suggests is that Socratic philosophy was a defense mechanism developed at the end of Athenian life. Rationalism was therefore a desperate attempt to save face in the coming uncertainty. And if one knows the historical context in which Plato and Socrates lived, it makes sense how the reason, virtue, happiness became medicine, and Socrates was the physician who turned reason into a tyrant. It was either fanatically embrace this new form of tyranny of reason, or all of society would perish. And I don't think it's any coincidence that less than 100 years after Socrates' death, the bright sun of Hellenic civilization and culture would reach a zenith from Malaria to the Indus River, and then quickly reach its dusk. Socrates, placing rationality at the highest virtue, devalued and condemned the life-affirming values so central to Greek life. Lastly, Nietzsche asks, did Socrates even comprehend what he was doing? Was he in some ways just a grand ironist who outwitted all of Athenian civilization? Perhaps, but let's look at his death. Socrates drinking the hemlock was not the courageous embrace of death, that of a man who gives his life for a larger meaning. No, according to Nietzsche, Socrates wanted to die, as he was a vulgar pleb who simply hated his life and put his hope in another illusory life in the realm of the forms. Socrates is no physician, he said to himself. Here death alone is the physician. Socrates has merely been sick a long time. I want to quickly finish this video by touching on something I mentioned in the beginning. That is the dichotomy between Socrates and Nietzsche. Like two ends on a pole, Socrates introduced metaphysics as the ultimate goal of philosophy, where Nietzsche revealed the ultimate failings of the metaphysicians. Both Socrates and Nietzsche are skeptics, and if we remember from the beginning of this video, Nietzsche warns us of wise men, and necessarily sees skepticism as a sign of the late ending of a civilization. Socrates' skepticism and ultimate rationality brought about a new age in Greek civilization, and we can only hope Nietzsche's skepticisms will bring about a new age as well, a philosophy of the future. While Socrates and Nietzsche are both skeptics, their ultimate answer to life is where the two physicians ultimately diverge. Socrates is skeptical of life, and as a result embraces the forms and places the imaginary world above ours. He denies life and makes the immaterial the highest virtue and the only way to achieve happiness. Nietzsche, in contrast, also skeptical of life, tells us to embrace life, even in all of its strange and terrible problems. Yes, the will of life rejoicing over its own inexhaustibleness of its highest types. Nietzsche tells us to embrace Dionysus.
good.